what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting to my side is the lovely Lady Claire, who is going to regale us with her unique perspective on the world. So, Lady Claire, what's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, I think that we have a very important update on the situation in North Korea. And I posted this right before I was getting ready to come in and do this segment of the show. Apparently, there is a think tank affiliated with Johns Hopkins University. It's called 38 North. And they believe that they have detected movement around the North Korean test sites, which may indicate that North Korea is getting ready to test another bomber missile. Now, these people have been amazingly prescient in their abilities so far to look at satellite imagery and figure out what it means. Apparently there is a very large celebration having to do with the North Korean military on the 25th, which is next Tuesday, and that's when the Carl Vincennes is actually going to be off the North Korean peninsula.
And this time we really, 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 really mean it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've read some analyses, one that very, very intelligently done in Asia Times, atimes.com, that apparently what Trump has done is he is sparking confusion and escalating the danger of war in North Korea.
Yes.
And if North Korea is miscalculating by any sort, it could lead to a major escalation. And what I would like to do, if I ever could, would be to sit President Trump down and say, sir, a word, please. The way that this can be de-escalated, Mike, is with China, South Korea, North Korea, the U.S. getting together around a conference table. And my attitude would be lock the doors, make sure that there is great food and plumbing facilities and a good place to sleep, until they get to a peace treaty to supersede the armistice, which, as we both know, is simply the absence of fighting, and with trade guarantees, etc., with the quid pro quo being that North Korea stops its nuclear weapons program. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing anything like that from the U.S. government.
No, you're not, because the U.S. government does not want to de-escalate the situation. We've got we've got Tillerson is out there saying, we don't want to talk with North Korea. North Korea will just do what we tell them to do, or bad things will happen to them. And it's a very belligerent attitude. But as long as you have one player who wants to escalate the wars are going to be escalated. The other countries obviously don't want to go along. No. But it isn't up to them. And unfortunately, the groupthink in Washington, D.C. is they understand that they have managed to wreck the economy. They've lost the trust of the American people, and they're thinking a new world war is going to fix all that because that worked the last 2 times. But it's a very, very different world.
Oh, yeah.
When the when Woodrow Wilson tricked the American people into World War I with the Lusitania, the American people were predisposed to believe the official story of a helpless passenger liner.
Yeah.
When Roosevelt goaded Japan into the attack on Pearl Harbor, the American people were predisposed to take Roosevelt's word that it was a complete sneak attack. But Trump does not have that advantage.
No.
At this point, the American people, they're expecting more lies. And they don't want to send their children off to be killed and crippled on the basis of lies, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, you know, I have seen articles that South Korea is now on heightened alert as of today, and ahead of another large important anniversary with a large concentration of military hardware, etc., etc. We've got Russian troops close to their border with North Korea, Chinese troops. About 150,000, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, and I'm sure Japan is on heightened alert here.
Yeah.
Frankly, I would be very cautious of North Korea having another military parade because that's a very inviting target for a cruise missile strike.
Yeah.
They're still talking about decapitation strikes, and it's very, very risky because I'm sure by now that Kim Jong-un is starting to disperse the components for the nuclear weapons that are being built, the missiles. We know that North Korea has an extensive military tunnel system where these missiles can be driven into and vanish from sight.
Right, right.
And regarding the satellite pictures, I've been hearing about it as well, that water's being pumped out, which is something that can precede detonation because you don't need that steam, radioactive steam coming out.
Right.
The last analysis I saw was the workers at the site are observed playing soccer, which means they're basically waiting in a holding pattern.
Yeah, yeah. But my sense is that this is going to start to get nasty sooner rather than later.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm talking to our neighbors around here. They all feel that a major war is coming. They all agree the United States is pushing for it. And they're all very concerned that living here on the island of Oahu, that if it spirals out of control, we're going to get hit. And hit hard. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And back to the Lady Claire.
Apparently, and this is from Press TV, which is an English language Iranian outlet close to the government, the Trump administration is going to resume munition sales to the Saudis to use in Yemen. And apparently this request from the Saudi Arabian government was just a formality. I mean, the U.S. is going to go ahead and, approve the deal, rubber stamp it, etc. But I've got to tell you, Mike, the hypocrisy in D.C. just sickens me, and the degree to which the Trump administration is thoroughly happy in being complicit with Saudi war crimes in Yemen. This does not bode well for peace in the Middle East or the world.
No, but again, the current policy of the U.S. government is a new world war. It's been demonstrated time and time again. And we're seeing hypocrisy and double standards where Trump was up there talking about beautiful babies at Idlib, and then you have the evacuation convoy that was attacked by U.S.-backed rebels. They literally lured the kids out of the buses with treats and then bombed them, and it's no big deal. Because, dead babies that can further the war agenda are going to get corporate media coverage. Dead babies that hurt the war agenda, they're just going to be ignored. They're not important.
Yeah, they're disposable, And children, women, innocent civilians have been getting bombed by the Saudis in Yemen. Food can't get in because the ports are blockaded, and you have a huge episode of children who are literally dying of malnutrition in the 21st century. And it's one of the worst ways I can imagine for a child to have to die. They've been seeing this huge spike in birth defects because of the use of depleted uranium weapons. And if there is a more cruel form of child abuse than poisoning a baby in the womb with depleted uranium, Mike, I can't think of what it is.
No, it's horrific. It is absolutely horrific. But once they go to war, everything is permissible, at least in the minds of those who promote the war.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, I'm absolutely ashamed and disgusted and embarrassed by our government. I'm tremendously disappointed in Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And again, Donald Trump may well have gone into the White House with the very best of intentions, and was either co-opted, blackmailed, or simply threatened to go along with the war agenda. I've heard rumors on several different fronts that he was literally told the war agenda is moving forward. You can continue to be president and support it, or you can oppose it, and you will not be president much longer.
Yeah. By the way, our Pentagon chief, our Secretary of Defense Mathis, has been in Israel to discuss Iran and Syria.
Yep.
Now, what would you imagine that the Israeli government's agenda is going to be?
Well, they're going to say, well, we're sure Iran is using chemical weapons on its own people, and Iran has completed its nuclear bomb, and Iran has a Death Star, and it's just going to be more of the same thing. Completely baseless allegations to conceal the fact that it is the United States and its allies, especially Israel, who are the aggressors in this new world war.
And I could feel the run-up with the corporate prostitutes demonizing Iran this last week.
Yeah, it started 3 days ago, and like a switch was thrown.
Yeah.
We got to drag Iran into what's going on in Yemen. We've got to drag Iran into what's going on in Syria.
Yeah.
And what's really astounding is the U.S. is struggling with the military engagements it's already dealing with and yet is moving forward to add more workload to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
They've just gone into Somalia. They're down in Sudan.
Yep.
They're talking about bringing pressure on one of the other states north of Pakistan, and of course going into North Korea and Iran. And the military stockpile isn't bottomless.
Yeah.
They're going to start running out of stuff.
And it's always interesting to me, the Israeli government's perspective, that it should always be American blood and American money spent to achieve Israel's geopolitical objectives in the region. The neutralization of Iran, the neutralization of Syria. But
the neutralization of Iraq.
Yeah. But as I mentioned in a previous article I posted, there is a 6,000-pound gorilla resting comfortably stretched across the Bösendorfer in the living room. And that 6,000-pound gorilla is Russia. If the United States keeps meddling in Syria on the ground, Syria may well push al-Assad into inviting Russian ground troops into the fray.
He's already out there saying he's not going to rule it out.
Oh, man.
He's not going to rule it out.
And I would like to ask Secretary of Defense Mattis, because he knows the kind of arms and training and equipment the Russians have, is he really going to bet the future existence of this country on against that? I am hoping and praying that the short answer is no, but Mike?
I don't think they're being analytical.
Yeah.
I think they're just caught up in this mythos that the United States has never lost a war, not mentioning Vietnam, of course.
Yes.
But, of course, we never won in North Korea.
No.
And it's not like the United States won World War I and World War II all by itself.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is that since the end of World War II, the U.S. has engaged in these covert interventions in other countries. They've only succeeded half the time. That's not a good batting average.
It's a lousy track record.
Yes.
It's a lousy track record. And speaking of war and weapons, China is building the world's largest nuclear submarine facility. And it's going to be able to produce as many as 4 ultra-modern subs at a time. And it's interesting. They're doing this in this very enclosed space, so there can be no snooping. People can't look and peek at what they're doing. And, so the kind of upgraded and updated technology they're going to be able to use, we won't be able to see it until those ships are actually out there.
Well, I'm sure for the most part, most countries who are engaged in building weapons, they're well aware of U.S. surveillance satellites, and they're taking steps to avoid them. Even back in World War II, underground bases were hardly unknown.
Yeah.
We actually had an underground, actually it's still there, by the way, an underground hangar here on Oahu, where warplanes were brought out by ship from the mainland and assembled here, and then flown off to the airfields and carriers. But so the idea that we have a good measure on what anybody else is doing because of the surveillance satellites is not entirely accurate.
Nope.
And I've heard complaints from within the intelligence community that we do not seem to have adequate ground truth. That we've become over-reliant on surveillance technology and don't really have assets in these other countries able to find out what's going on. And that means we may actually be very blind to what the real capabilities of Russia and China happen to be. If Russia and China team up together, they are going to be a formidable foe that the United States is not going to be able to prevail against, even if it does go nuclear.
Yeah. And that's going to be nasty. I'd like to go back over to the antics of Congress.
Oh, please do.
And the antics of Congress, I'm not amused. I'm just not amused. Apparently, it's not over. The House Intel panel has called Comey, Clapper, Rogers, Brennan, and Yates to testify on Russia's messing up the last election or throwing it to Trump. Michael, I've got to tell you, trying to create a there which was never really there is absolutely unbelievable. this reeks to me of desperation on the cusp of madness.
No, what's going on here is they're understanding it is inevitable. We will be going to war with Russia. They're trying to build a case with the American people that the Russians are evil and that we have to go to war against them. But as we mentioned earlier in the show, even the people working on this Russia investigation are saying Israel's the real party interfering in U.S. politics.
Yeah.
You've got Obama over there in France interfering with their election. And the Russia bashing is trying to pre-sell the idea that Russia's the evil empire, like Reagan described the Soviet Union, and move forward to accept the inevitability of war with Russia. And that really will hit us right where we're sitting.
Yes, that definitely will. And dang it, St. Petersburg is on my bucket list.
Boy, maybe we should ask for political asylum in Russia. Because we're on the verge of being political prisoners in our own country. So let's ask for asylum. Putin, if you're listening to this show, we want to come on over there.
Yeah, you know. I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to mention it. The Gotham Shield exercise in New York to simulate a nuclear blast over Manhattan as actual war nears. I've got to tell you, this is causing the hair on the back of my neck to nervously break dance in a very uncoordinated way upon hearing about this. So if the exercise turns into a false flag event, is the U.S. going to blame Russia, North Korea, Iran, Somalia? You know,
they've already telegraphed it. They've already telegraphed it because the plan is specifically for a 10-kiloton weapon, which is the largest North Korea has tested so far. But is far smaller than the current Russian and Chinese weapons now in use. Now, they may try and claim it was Iran's 10-kiloton nuclear weapon, but we need to remember that there is a radioactive hotspot around the Israeli embassy in New York City.
Right.
And it was discovered when the Nuclear Emergency Search Team was creating baseline maps to make it easier to find a new radiation source without having to go through all the benign radiation sources, radiotherapy machines at hospitals, isotope samples at various labs and research universities. And they discovered a hotspot at the Israeli embassy. Israel will not explain it. They will not allow an inspection. And we need to remember that Israel's first-generation nuclear weapons were made with weapons-grade uranium smuggled out of the United States of America. So what if they left behind enough to build a bomb? Because once you've got that uranium, building an actual bomb, especially one that doesn't have to fly, that's very, very easy to do. And at this point, we know there has to be a false flag, because the American people they're tired of war, they're not supporting the war. Crashing planes into buildings is passé, it's old hat. They're going to have to do something that is so terrible and horrific that Americans are going to be too afraid to take the chance that it's not true. And that means that there's a real possibility of a nuclear false flag attack to get things going. Look what the government has done before. Sink the Lusitania, claim Pearl Harbor was a surprise. This is how the government gets us into wars, with hoaxes. And they understand the American people are deeply distrustful of the government, and that means they're going to have to do something really, really big. And we know that in past false flag terror attacks, there have been drills taking place at the exact same time and location. That was true on 9/11.
Boston Marathon, too.
Boston Marathon bombing, the London 77 tube false flag. And the reason they have the drills going on at the same time is to provide cover for all the assets getting into place. And at some point, somebody makes a decision for the drill to actually go live and go ahead with whatever they're going to do. And the fact that they're talking about a 10-kiloton warhead seems to suggest a linkage to North Korea, or possibly claim that Iran has attacked us.
Now, here's the question I would ask. With all of the insane security to which Americans like you and me have to submit when we go on a plane, how did it get there? You know?
Well, that's a good question, and when we come back from this commercial break, I will have an answer.
Thank you.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And now, first of all, if there's a nuclear explosion in the U.S., it's a false flag. That's a given. Iran is not going to drop a nuke on the United States of America. because that would bring on the invasion they do not want to have happen. The retaliation would destroy the country. The same thing is true of North Korea.
Yeah.
These other countries who want nuclear weapons want them to deter being invaded in an age where the U.S. is invading and regime-changing countries left and right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
So nobody is going to initiate a nuclear attack against us, and let us keep in mind that for all the talk about Saddam's nukes and Iran's nukes and North Korea's nukes and all the rest of it, there's only one country that has actually dropped a nuclear weapon on the civilians of another country, and that is the United States of America.
Twice.
Yeah, twice.
Twice.
And, you know, I find it amazing to hear the United Nations screaming about all these other nuclear countries. They're trying to build nuclear weapons, but they won't deal with the nuclear weapons owned by the one nation proven to actually use them. Now, okay, to answer the question, though, how would one get a nuclear weapon into the United States? You know something, in hindsight, I'm not going to answer that question because I don't want to give anybody any ideas.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay, I'll tell you off the air later.
All right, but what I'm thinking is that would be extraordinarily difficult to pull it off.
Well, for somebody with the resources of a nation-state, not necessarily.
Ah, okay.
But
All right.
I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, I'd like to sort of bop on over to Venezuela right now. They have been in the middle of vast protests against their president Maduro, who has essentially taken the government and the whatever constitutional protections and judicial issues were going on are no more. He sort of declared himself a dictator. And apparently the government of Venezuela has seized the GM, the General Motors plant down there. And people at Coca-Cola, which also has a bottling plant, indicated that they're not going to pull its operations, and they've been assured that there'll be no problems, yada, yada, yada.
Well, there seems to be some kind of an issue with General Motors itself and certain monies that were supposed to be paid and were not, leading to the seizure. And you need to understand there are also pro-Maduro rallies taking place on a large scale that are not being reported. Now, Venezuela has been under constant attempt for regime change by the United States going back to Hugo Chavez. Yeah. The United States hates the fact that Venezuela spends the Venezuelans' money on the people of Venezuela, and that's a bad example. They don't want that idea to catch on that government should spend the people's money on what's good for the people. Because we certainly don't tolerate that kind of behavior here in the United States of America, as you can tell by walking down the streets and looking at the dilapidated infrastructure, like San Francisco's electric system. But the U.S. has been waging economic war on Venezuela, and it was complicated by that very poorly thought-out oil price war against Russia, which brought a lot of harm to Europe and other oil-producing nations. It put Saudi Arabia into serious economic hardship. They actually had to sell government bonds for the first time in recent history. Venezuela being an oil exporting country, it hit them very, very hard. Yeah. And the oil, of course, is a big issue why the U.S. wants regime change in Venezuela, because Venezuela's been selling their oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. They sell oil to China directly for the yuan.
Right, right.
So that's what's going on there, and it's a very complicated story.
I am hoping that whatever happens and whatever emerges politically in Venezuela will avoid bloodshed, because the Venezuelan people have suffered enormously.
Well, unfortunately, there's already a lot of bloodshed going on. And, it looks like it's going to be on the verge of a civil war down there. Or we could see Nikki Haley get up in the UN and say, we must have a humanitarian intervention into Venezuela, and we're going to be off and fighting a war down there, which is kind of weird, because in the movie Avatar, our soldier who's in the wheelchair, when his commanding officer is talking about his file, he says, "You were in Venezuela, that was some mean bush." And it's almost like James Cameron knew what was coming on down the road.
Deja vu all over again, eh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow, yeah. So I'm hoping, though, for the people that things do calm down and they're able to get back in control of the political process in a way that's going to move the people and the economy forward.
Well, that would be nice, but unfortunately, those who are promoting this war agenda, they do not care what happens to ordinary people. They're just the background noise. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to Claire, we're going to take a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Good day, Michael. What I want to talk about what's going on in Fresno with the 4 white males who were murdered. And when Ruth killed those people in Carolina, it was on every news network. Only one network's talking about what happened. All the other liberal networks ain't saying a word about what's happened with the 4 males being murdered in cold blood. And Michael, let me ask you, do you think Bernie Sanders would do anything with MS-13 like Donald Trump's doing? Do you think Bernie Sanders is going to get all these gangbangers out of here? And Michael, go back to it. If you heard, I can't believe what I saw. I saw on a website the other day, 13,800 white Americans have been murdered in the United States in the last 2 years by Afro-Americans. Is that true?
I don't have the exact statistics, but I do know that there has definitely been a bias in the corporate media where they're always reporting white on black crime, but they don't report black on black crime or black on white crime. And again, last year it appeared to be part of the attempt to bolster Hillary Clinton's chances by fanning the flames of racism. But if they're still doing it now, we have to look for the reason why. And I'll be very honest, I hadn't heard what happened in Fresno. When did this happen?
Okay, this happened last week. 4 white males were murdered in cold blood. The guy walked right up to him and shot him with a .357 Magnum. Shot one of them in the Catholic church parking lot. The other ones were walking on the street. He was hating white people, and he's a rapper. And he murdered,
I thought originally they said he was shouting
Allahu Akbar.
Aloha Snack Bar or whatever it is. Apparently, I heard he was a rapper. He's got a video out. I'd like to know, first of all, if he's on prescription antidepressants. And the second issue is that, again, yes, there has been a very obvious bias in corporate media. Certain things are reported to push certain political agendas. News that doesn't support the agendas gets ignored. And that's true with the crime statistics. It's true with the civilians being killed in the war zones. Only those civilians whose deaths support the war agenda are getting press coverage, and everybody else is being ignored.
Well, Michael, again, what I want to reiterate is this. 13,000 white Americans have been murdered by Afro-Americans in this country in two-year time. Michael, they haven't happened in the Middle East with all these Arab countries with our troops over there.
Where did the numbers come from?
Yeah, Tom, where are you getting these numbers?
That was on a web. It was on I can't remember if it was TMZ or it was one of these websites I saw where they were talking about the black on white crime. It's unbelievable. It's unprecedented.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll look into the statistics, and I know statistics can be misreported. Again, going back to the militant feminist craze of the 1990s, and they were screaming about domestic violence, about how men were beating up women, and it turned out actually that in the white population, domestic violence was actually gender balanced. The women were being just as abusive as the men, and in the black population, it was the women being more abusive than the men. But it was always being portrayed in the news as all of these mean men beating up all these poor, helpless women.
Well, one more thing, Michael. In San Francisco, back in the 70s, there was a murder thing that was going on with these black Muslims, and they killed a bunch of white people. I believe it was like 80-something of them. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about how the media tried to keep that under wraps, too, because I believe it was back in the late 70s where they had like 5, 6 black like Muslims in San Francisco. And I can't remember it wasn't the Green River case. I can't remember the case of Helter Skelter or.
You're not talking about the zebra killings, are you?
No, that's it, Michael.
Okay.
The zebra killings. I can't believe that the media never talked about those zebra killings.
Well, actually, I recall there was a lot of coverage about the zebra killings. That's why I remember the name. You know.
Well, what I read about the zebra killings, they had some talk about it on the West Coast. The East Coast the media on the East Coast would never even talk about it.
Well, I was living in Southern California. I was living in Southern California at the time. Anyway, Tom, listen, we're going to let you go here and get on back to the news here. So thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to drop that one. Claire, you wanted to talk about Turkey.
Yes, and this referendum in Turkey, which gave Erdogan just absolutely almost complete power over the government. If there was any judicial oversight, I think that's gone. And it's really unfortunate. We don't even know how much voter fraud was there to have caused this
we're
to
already
pass.
getting the indications. I mean,
really?
Erdogan won the referendum by just about 1 percentage point, which in most places would lead to an immediate recount. We know that there were 1.5 million ballots that were not properly submitted. They're supposed to be in a special envelope and with a special stamp as part of their guards against election fraud. And the Turkish election official, the top election official, said, well, we're going to go ahead and count them anyway, even though they're the wrong form. International observers are saying there's another 2 million votes that are very, very dubious.
Yikes.
And again, we see election fraud happening all over the globe. And it's kind of obvious that there had to be massive election fraud because no people vote away their civil protections and their liberties to a tyrant. It just simply does not happen.
No.
And so it had to be election fraud. People are now referring to Erdogan as a new sultan. And even though I'm not a believer in the prophecies of Nostradamus, Erdogan is shaping up to be like this sultan from the Mideast who helps to ignite World War III. It really is kind of spinning out of control there.
So what do you think is going to be the future now of the Turkish relationship to NATO? Because Turkey is a NATO member. Where is that going?
Well, NATO, in theory, could eject Turkey. I don't think it's going to happen because of Turkey's strategic location. They've always been using Turkey as a forward missile base. In fact, it was the placing of missiles by the United States in Turkey aimed at the Soviet Union that provoked the Cuban Missile Crisis. So everybody's looking at, no matter what Erdogan does, Turkey is strategically important. And that may have been the reason the United States was involved in this attempt to remove Erdogan a while back, and they botched it. They botched it, and I'm sure Erdogan is not going to forget that anytime soon.
No, I don't think he is. I would like to go back and talk a little bit more about the U.S. demonization of Iran. And I am really hoping and praying that people like Mattis, etc., understand that the U.S. military doesn't have the troop strength, the weaponry, the manufacturing, or the money to go ahead with a head-to-head conflict with Russia over Iran. This magical thinking, urging the U.S. government to go to war with a country that's never attacked us, but just had the temerity to throw out its U.S.-backed puppet ruler, the Shah in 79, is horrifically dangerous.
Well, Iran is coming up on their new elections. They've already said that Ahmadinejad is not allowed to run again, so they can't scream about Ahmadinejad coming back and wanting to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. But you're right about the magical thinking, and looking over the last 16 years, with the exception of Iraq, which is still having to be garrisoned and we're still fighting there, the U.S. has not actually won any of these wars they've started.
Nope.
They're still quagmires, they're still dragging on, and to be taking on an added workload against a major nation like Iran, which is now being backed by Russia and China. Remember, earlier in the show we were talking about Russia's going to bring Iran into the Shanghai Cooperative.
Yes.
And it has to be magical thinking. But one thing that we learned during the George W. Bush administration is that these people in the administration may have their own opinions, but they basically follow their orders from whoever's giving those orders. We know now that Colin Powell knew he was lying when he was showing all the pictures about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, and he held up his little vial of talcum powder.
Yeah, the yellow-caked uranium speech.
Well, no, that was earlier, but that was another lie, and that was discredited as well.
Right.
And all these people knew they were being ordered to lie, but that was their job to go on out and lie, whether they're in government or the corporate media. And so the end result is that we're going to see a lot of stuff come on out about Iran. They're going to claim that Iran is still trying to build a nuclear bomb, that they've somehow evaded the IAEA inspectors. And again, if there's going to be a nuclear false flag, given that it's on the East Coast, New York, they're more than likely to try and blame it on Iran. But again, it's ridiculous. The United States is the world's most powerful nuclear power, and my parents' generation forked over $5 trillion for that nuclear deterrent, and that was back when $1 trillion was really a lot of money, because it was going to deter other countries from attacking us. And if that really doesn't work, then we're all owed a refund. It was another giant government fraud. But that's the idea the government is trying to sell you, is that even though the response by the United States would be to annihilate an entire nation, that we should be afraid that the leaders of those nations, for no real reason, are just going to try and drop a nuclear weapon on us.
It makes absolutely no sense. And we also have to remember with Mattis in Israel right now that the Israeli government was cheerleading for the Iraq War, too, when President Bush was in power.
They were absolutely in love with that.
And we all understand just how brilliantly the war in Iraq has worked out.
Well, it worked out good for the defense contractors, and it worked out good for Israel, which is up there buying assets at fire sale prices.
Yeah.
And it worked out well for the bankers who financed all of this.
Yeah.
But then wars are not fought for the benefit of the general population. Wars are fought to make the rich people richer, and the ordinary population are just the gaming pieces to be just spent to win the war. And we're talking about your children.
Yeah.
And we're talking about your children being killed and crippled in wars based on greed and pipeline rights of way. We're going to take a phone call here. Terry in Tennessee. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I wanted to ask Claire a question.
Okay.
A while back, you had mentioned something about doing a project about people that had been married for a long time, and I thought about that. I couldn't find the right pictures. I had to do a move. My husband and I retired. We've been married 42 years.
Congratulations.
And I know. It's wonderful.
I think that was the I Stand Amazed video.
Yes, that was the I Stand Amazed video, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I wanted to do was I finally found two pictures that kind of match up, us back way in the day and us back here in the future.
Okay.
And we are expectant grandparents now. It's
well,
so exciting.
congratulations. But that video's over and done with, and we don't go back and rework old projects. We just move on to new projects, and I Stand Amazed is already done. In fact, there were two versions of it.
Really?
Yeah, there was the original one where we had all the reader photos that came on in, and then I did another version of it that was basically focused on Claire and I for our 20th wedding anniversary.
Which I love.
Yes, and but that was like 3-4 years ago that we did that. So
it's been a while.
Yeah, we don't go back and rework the old stuff.
That has been a while.
Yeah, afraid so.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, well, listen.
Wanted to know if you were still working on it. Okay.
No, it's done. All right. Take care.
And
Thank
congratulations on the grandchildren. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right, there we go. Now, next.
Next, okay. Trump's Attorney General wants to arrest Julian Assange. Now, how exactly he's going to do this, because Assange is in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Now, what is your guess on this? Do you think that the British authorities plan to violate international law and storm the embassy and arrest Assange in behalf of the U.S.?
Well, they were trying to put pressure on Ecuador's government to deny the asylum. In fact, it even became an issue in Ecuador's recent elections, where one of the candidates said, if I win, I will revoke Assange's asylum. But if they can't get Ecuador to revoke the asylum and they invade the embassy, the political fallout from that is going to be very, very bad for the United States.
That's an act of war, isn't it?
It's an act of war.
Yeah.
And it's definitely it's a violation of longstanding global international law and diplomatic principle.
Right.
And it's going to send a message to the rest of the world that the United States might just go ahead and invade your embassy for whatever they want to do. Now, we have Marine Le Pen, who's already out there saying that if she wins the presidency in this upcoming election, that she's going to grant Julian Assange and Edward Snowden asylum in France, grant them French citizenship so they can stay there for the rest of their lives. And what's really amazing is to see our government screaming that they want to arrest Julian Assange for exposing the crimes of Hillary Clinton, but they wouldn't arrest Hillary Clinton for committing those crimes in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing on display here a government that empowers and protects criminals and only goes after those trying to expose the crimes. And again, go look at that graphic I put at the top of the main page. Robert F. Kennedy, in 1961, declared war on organized crime, and at the moment it looks like organized crime has won. And that is what is running this country.
Yeah, it's really sad, and you vote and you vote and you vote, and yet nothing changes, Mike. The agenda stays the same, the agenda of the deep state, and the corporate moneyed just never changes.
Well, I am dealing with this incredible disappointment. I really had thought that by keeping Hillary out of the White House, we were going to get Trump in. We were going to see the rise of the independent media. We were going to pull back from this insane rush to a world war that I don't think this country can win. And to see us still irrevocably on that path now, it's hard for somebody to look at that and remain entirely cheerful.
Sweetheart, I mean, me too. And a lot of other people out there who were very concerned about a Clinton presidency. But yeah, it's frustrating. And I think one of the most important things we need to do right now is to figure out how to take care of each other and people around us we care about. We have a wonderful friend who lives just catty-cornered from us with a 2.5-year-old who is just precious. And his favorite word at 2.5, and every one of you out there who's a parent or grandparent will understand this, is no. And said in just that inflection. And so Mike and I are trying to figure out what we can do to keep his mom as safe as we can and he as safe as we can, through this period, because I am deeply concerned, and I'm not Mrs. Chicken Little of Oahu, believe me, for all of the reasons we have represented to you, both visually through the radio show and the website. I am very concerned that things are coming to a head, and very quickly.
Absolutely. We've got to take one more commercial break. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before I do anything else, I want to remind you all one more time that John Stadmiller's show, which is coming up in about 5 minutes, his first hour guest is Gerald Celente, and that is definitely going to be something you're going to want to listen to. So, again, Gerald Celente, first hour of John Stadmiller's show coming right up at the top of the hour. I'm looking at the Fox News feed, and they're talking over the commercial. They're talking about whether or not they're going to get an emergency spending bill passed to keep the government running, and it's a big dog and pony show here. I mean, isn't it amazing how there's never money for actually taking care of the nation and its people, but there's always money for more bombs and more missiles?
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't think they should talk about any more spending and any more increases in the military budget until the Pentagon figures out what they did with that $6 trillion that seems to have vanished without any trace at all.
That would have been helpful, yeah.
And the reason we're obviously very concerned here about an escalating world war is because right out that window there is Pearl Harbor. I look down there, we can see the Arizona Memorial, the Missouri, and Pearl Harbor, even though most of the actual weapons are forward-based over on Guam and right now off of North Korea, Pearl Harbor is a major communication nexus for the entire Pacific Fleet, and if this goes to a real shooting war, and if Russia and China come on in, it is inevitable this island is going to be attacked, if for no other reason than to sever that communication hub. And that's why Claire and I are a little concerned, and we do have some emergency preparations if we have to go up to the north part of the island and so forth. But it's very, very stressful, and everybody around here is feeling it. I'm talking to our neighbors and our friends. They're all thinking exactly the same thing. The U.S. government has set up a war that is going to get this island attacked again. So there we are. You had one more story you wanted to talk about.
Yes, I did. Very interesting, too. Trump's lawyer is saying that people have no right to protest at his rallies. I'm kind of scratching my head here. Apparently, they argued yesterday in a Thursday court filing that protesters have no right to express dissenting views at his campaign rallies because such protests infringed on his First Amendment rights.
Well, and unfortunately, there are other politicians who have establish that as a precedent.
Yeah.
That you can't argue against them, you can't point out where they're lying on their campaign trail, because it's their First Amendment right to lie to you. At the same time, they're insisting that the independent media shouldn't have a First Amendment right because we're out here telling the truth.
Yeah, yeah. I find, you know, that smell of burning hypocrisy in the morning so putrid. You know, it's grim.
I think the only thing that is going to save the world is if there is a major economic crash in this country that brings it all tumbling down the way the former Soviet Union did. Because if that doesn't happen, I don't see how we're going to avoid a nuclear world war. Simply because the U.S. can't win conventional wars against Russia and China.
Especially if they're tag teaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, there's the music. Time for us to get out of here. Have a really good weekend. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller's show. He's got Gerald Salente. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.